Mermaids, the enigmatic women of the sea, frequently reported in both the past and present. Dating back to the very oldest of mankind's mythologies, many stories of distinct humanoid fish women have permeated virtually every seafaring culture on Earth, and they remain one of the most frequently reported paranormal creatures to this day. In the most ancient stories, all these different merfolk and other sea creatures were considered the subjects of the deities Dagon and Kalulu, and nearly all species of them had a monstrous side as well. My ancestors, the Oldrey line of hunters, specifically Harold, wrote much about them, the most incredible being an encounter when he was still a paladin. He had been sent to slay a monstrous sea creature terrorizing the shore. He succeeded in dispatching the dragon-like monster, but fell into the sea, to be saved by a trio of Marrow, a sometimes friendlier subspecies of mermaid chronicled in Celtic mythology. It was the same type once held prisoner in St. George's Keep. Pictured in this photo I've shown several times now, which I've managed to have digitally enhanced with various filters and AI. Availability of these photos to be announced this weekend on live stream.
Have you ever heard of Dagon, an ancient god worshipped in Sumeria, Mesopotamia, Canaan, and other places? He and his offspring, Kulalu, are the lesser-known inspiration to the Lovecraft mythos, said to be gods of wisdom, the sea, and all creatures living within it, including the various types of merpeople. I have good reason to believe that the mythology around them is true, and that it's only part of the story. My ancestor, the monster hunter Harold Oldrey, left detailed writings about his encounters with the children of Dagon, as well as other types of sea monsters, along with antique photographs of these creatures once held within the dungeon St. George's Keep. These monsters once terrorized anyone delving too deep into their master's domain, and his dark demonic priests were considered among the worst things the sons of man ever faced. What power these creatures would still hold in the modern day is difficult to say, as are their numbers, given the vastness of the unexplored seas of the world. I do know that this idol, either representing Dagon or Kulalu, still holds power. This dark relic, once guarded by my ancestors, was part of what burned through the protective box that held them. I'm currently in contact with multiple demonologists, mediums, and other paranormal experts to try to figure out what to do with this and the other items.
A 150-year-old photo of a sea monster, the next in this series on their album from St. George's Keep. I've spoken much about my ancestors' writings on this topic, the many varied horrors of the seas, some massive, others small enough to capture. While reinforcing the protections of a container my ancestors kept to guard dark magical objects, I came across an idol that looked suspiciously similar to the supposedly fictional Cthulhu. My great-grandfather wrote in one of his journals of meeting the character's author, H.P. Lovecraft, and strongly believed the man belonged to what he called a cosmic cult, granting him secret occult knowledge that he infused into his work, including creatures like the Deep Ones, who have known historical equivalents like the Sea Monk, which my ancestors described as servants of the Sumerian god Dagon. Now take a good long look at the first ever publicly released photograph of these horrific sea monstrosities, once held within the deepest flooded bowels of St. George's Keep, along with several other distinct types of supposedly mythological underwater creatures. Our exploration of this dungeon has only just begun. The varied monstrous deep-sea children of Dagon, written of at length in monster hunter Harold Oldrey's journal, historically referred to in common circles as sea monks. They are deep-sea monstrosities serving as the foot soldiers of far more horrific entities, with a marked difference in appearance between their deep and shallow water populations. Dagon was a primordial god of the sea and all life therein. Among many ancient cultures, H.P. Lovecraft used the name for one of his horrid deep-sea entities. Leopold, last of the Oldrey hunters, was his contemporary and believed his work to be based on true knowledge. In his works, Dagon's servants were monstrous humanoid fish creatures referred to as Deep Ones, described with a striking resemblance to the deep-sea variant, while those from shallower waters to me strongly resemble the monster and the creature from the Black Lagoon films. More examples where writers and filmmakers seem to have knowledge of the supernatural. Dagon, the master they served, has never been seen by man. though demon-like entities possibly with closer ties to him have.
Of all the myriad horrors found in the deep seas, the Kululun stands alone in its pure malevolence. The demonic priests of the ancient horror known as Kululu, a monstrous creature of various mythologies. The Kululun in its natural state was not so human. Like natural cephalopods, it could alter its appearance in surprising ways. Its base form was a horrific octopus-like entity of terrifying intelligence that could shift into an amalgam human form as part of its goal to instill madness in man, a form of induced psychosis reminiscent of some demonic possessions. Many will see a resemblance to the character Cthulhu of H.P. Lovecraft's mythos. He was certainly inspired by Kululu mythology as well as that of the Sumerian Dagon. The last of the Oldrey slayers believed Lovecraft was of a cosmic cult and used accentuated true knowledge in his stories. The Kululun represents the closest true entity to his works. What could be called a pagan deep-sea demon, bent on driving humans to madness to the point of taking their own lives, as well as those of others. Slaying them is all but impossible, and disconnecting them from an ensnared target almost equally so.
Continuing the higher resolution videos brings us to the sea monsters, one of the favorites of my fans. Starting here with a mermaid, specifically a Celtic merrow based on its description. As you can see, it's almost up to its chest in some kind of gross, murky water, because in this section near the bottom of St. George's Keep, they could fill the cells halfway up with water to hold these sea creatures in place. You can see her looking up at whoever's taking the photo, and while a lot of people maybe don't think of mermaids as monsters, they would at times hunt people on the shore, on ships, and so they were part of what the dungeon took care of. Next, a much more visibly monstrous creature, the children of Dagon. Dagon was a Sumerian, Assyrian, a god for many cultures of the sea and the creatures of the sea. These are the creatures that I believe inspired H.P. Lovecraft's Deep Ones, deep sea fishmen horrors, terrorizing people out in the Pacific and in deeper waters. You could even say kind of similar to the classic creature from the Black Lagoon. Here we have what might be a purely natural creature, massive crustacean-like creatures, and massive is relative, but much larger than any known crab or crustacean species that I know of. These things would swarm and devour people. Again, possibly just a natural creature, but something that made a habit of hunting humans. So to the sons of man, those who ran St. George's Keep, this was a creature that it was their responsibility to take care of. And here we have the most spiritually malevolent of the sea creatures that were once held in St. George's Keep, also supposedly associated with Dagon. This was some kind of entity that they considered borderline demonic, on the same level of spiritual malevolence as a demon. It could kind of shift its form slightly to look more human, as you can see here. It was some kind of cephalopod creature. I often describe it as the closest thing in here to something like Cthulhu. And finally, a variation on that children of Dagon that I showed before. This is another type of sea creature that would be found out in the oceans. Humanoid, like the H.P. Lovecraft Deep Ones, but at least relatively less monstrous. You can see it has much smaller teeth. It was smaller in stature, but still a monstrous creature that you would definitely not want to come across while out in the water. That's all for the sea monsters, but I'll have more videos on this coming soon.
Some supposedly supernatural creatures are no more than very rare animals, described in modern times as cryptids. Multiple menacing creatures of this type were once held alongside the occult monsters and demonic entities in St. George's Keep. Cryptids with a proclivity to hunt humans or engage them in territorial violence were considered the sons of man's prerogative. One such creature was the harpy, winged bird terrors of the skies, described in multiple ancient mythologies as dark magical bird women. The reality seems to be massive man-eating birds of prey with a vaguely human shape. Another are the gigantic man-like ogres from many parts of Europe, described as ferocious giants with no qualms about making meals of humans. They were most likely a race of large proto-humans similar to Neanderthals. Another are the horrific crustacean creatures half the size of a man. Large crab-like creatures have existed in many mythologies for millennia. These were likely a giant species similar to coconut crabs that hunted humans openly. These well represent the very nature of those things held in St. George's Keep. Why did the Oldrey line of supernatural hunters stop with my great-grandfather, Leopold? In truth, it was never meant to. My great-uncle was meant to continue on. In digging through tightly guarded family secrets, I've uncovered more about the events that broke this chain, starting with multiple disappearances involving mermaids and incredibly dark cults. My great-uncle served in the Navy, in a unit tied to a secret government agency involved in the supernatural. A U.S. equivalent to the Sons of Man, though rather than old-world hunters and vampire slayers. These men were intimidating government agents and wary brazen military officers. My great-uncle disappeared during research involving mermaids, leading his sister, my grandmother, to pull dramatically away from our legacy. This would come into play years later when my mother came to her desperate for help and answers. Her closest friend had disappeared after a short trip in the nearby forest, a location known for dark occult activity, said to house cultists and worse. She knew of her grandfather's work and wanted his belongings for answers, but her mother outright refused, claiming it far too dangerous. From what I've now learned, I believe she was right, and this tied to the darkest possible of groups. I'll be going into deeper detail over the coming days.
So obviously this is pretty freaky. I do have a pretty good idea of what this could be, as I'm sure most of you do as well. Let's go ahead and look at the video again and slow it down and zoom in. It seems like these guys are trying to trap it or something, or at least they know it's out here. And they react pretty strongly. Here it is, significantly slowed down. And you can see more here, the clawed-looking hand that comes up out of the water to grab at the chicken. I did take some screenshots here. You can see the face, and here is a succession of that claw. Now, a lot of you already know what we do here. We look into the Oldrey family bestiary to find information about these kinds of things. Of course, I cannot speak to the validity of these original videos. I always try to mention that. But I try to look at if these are legitimate, what could this be? Clearly, this is some type of mermaid, not wholly unlike the Mero that was held in St. George's Keep, photoed here. You can see some similarities, though this one doesn't look quite as gruesome, you could say. But clearly this is some type of mermaid or woman of the water, whatever you want to call them. You can see it a little better here in this enhanced photo, as well as some of the information about Mero that are in the Oldrey family bestiary. As I've said many times, there are many, many different types of mermaids around the world. Basically, every culture that touches water of any kind has some version of a mermaid myth. These are also, obviously, as in this video, one of the creatures most commonly cited still today. Haunting mermaid mummy from Japan is a gruesome monkey-fish hybrid with dragon claws, new scans reveal. Hey guys, you know I like to talk to you about all this crazy, weird, occult-related stuff going on in the world. And while this one is not really supernatural, it's got mermaids, it's got mummies, it's got a little bit of Frankenstein, so I thought you'd find it interesting. Reiterating, scientists scanned this mummy. It's from Japan, supposedly a mermaid, and the initial results suggest it is a, quote, horrifying mix of fish, monkey, and lizard parts. There's actually several of these kind of constructed artifacts. They're called Fiji mummies. That's after the one that P.T. Barnum got in the 1840s. A lot of sideshows have used things like this. This particular mummy was purchased in Japan by an American naval officer, and he donated it to a historical society in Springfield, Ohio in 1906. Several of these so-called Fiji mermaids have been created and shown in different sideshows around the world. I'll show you a couple of them. This one really just looks like some kind of sculpture, but it looks pretty cool and gives you a really good idea of what the concept is here. And this one here is just the creepiest one I could find on Google. And apparently this is the first time that it has been X-rayed and CT scanned, which you can see here. And it says the initial investigation found that the mummy appears to be made from the head and torso of a monkey, sewed onto the decapitated body of a fish, while the mermaid's hands are the clawed legs from a lizard, most likely a Komodo dragon. Now apparently this is not the only mummified mermaid that has undergone such intensive scans, and another one is pretty interesting. Mostly because it was found in a hidden box in a Japanese temple. You know, they expected it to be, it was about 12 inches long. They expected it to be from the mid-1700s. They thought it was also some kind of monkey-fish hybrid, but it was actually basically just a doll made from cloth, paper, and cotton. It was painted with sand and charcoal and held together by metal pins. Various animal parts, including mammal hair and fish skin, were stuck to the outside of it. Now, both of these mermaids and all the Fiji mermaids kind of closely resemble a mythological Japanese creature called the Ningyo. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's a mythical fish-like creature with human heads, kind of like you can think of it as a Japanese mythology version of a mermaid. I've mentioned a lot of times there are many, many different types of mermaid mythologies all over the world. You can see some ancient artistic depictions of these things here. This one looks much creepier and more like the Fiji mermaids I showed before. One last particularly horrifying one for good measure, so hope you guys found this interesting. I sure did.